What if I told you that you're alive today because of a massive, illegal psychological bluff during the Cuban Missile Crisis between two men in a dark room? Back in 1962, the world came within 60 seconds of nuclear annihilation, and traditional diplomacy had completely collapsed. Sure, everyone remembers the Cuban Missile Crisis as 13 days of terror, but the real story, the one they buried for almost 3 decades, is far stranger and more terrifying than anything you learned in school. This is how a handful of secret psychological warfare tactics, deployed in backrooms and on sweltering submarines, stopped World War III and saved roughly 1 billion human lives. Let's paint the picture. By October 1962, the Cold War had been heating up for years. The United States had nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey, Italy, and the United Kingdom, all aimed straight at the Soviet Union. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, thinking he'd spotted weakness in young President Kennedy after that disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, decided to roll the dice. He struck a secret deal with Fidel Castro to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 100 miles off the Florida coast. The Soviet codename was Operation Anodyne. October 14th changed everything. A U-2 spy plane snapped photographs that made Washington's blood freeze. Clear evidence of medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missile sites going up in Cuba. 2 days later, Kennedy got the briefing that would define his presidency and immediately gathered his executive committee, ExComm, to weigh their options. And here's the part that should terrify you. The Americans had no idea that the Soviets had already smuggled 162 nuclear warheads into Cuba, including 100 tactical nuclear weapons that the local Soviet commander could launch without calling Moscow. No codes needed, no permission required. One man on the ground could trigger nuclear war. Kennedy privately confided to his advisors that he put the odds of escalation to full-scale war somewhere between 1 in 3 and 50-50, a coin flip for civilization's survival. Military estimates suggested such a war would slaughter over 200 million North Americans, and double or triple that number across the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and China, with radioactive fallout choking the entire planet. Kennedy himself had been briefed that a nuclear exchange would likely kill 1/3 of all humanity. October 22nd arrived with Kennedy addressing the nation, announcing a naval quarantine of Cuba. 2 days later, Strategic Air Command jumped to DEFCON 2, the highest alert level ever confirmed, with 1,400 bombers, 145 intercontinental ballistic missiles, and roughly 2,900 nuclear weapons locked and loaded for Soviet targets. The world had never stared deeper into the abyss. But October 27th, the day historians call Black Saturday, brought everything crashing together at once. A U-2 reconnaissance plane got shot down over Cuba, killing Major Rudolph Anderson. Another U-2 accidentally wandered into Soviet airspace, prompting Kennedy's exasperated response. "There's always some son of a bitch who doesn't get the word." And at a base in Duluth, Minnesota, a guard spotted a bear climbing the fence, mistook it for a Soviet saboteur, and triggered an alarm that nearly scrambled a nuclear interceptor squadron in Wisconsin. Yet Black Saturday's most dangerous moment happened beneath the Atlantic waves, and almost nobody heard about it for decades. Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine B-59 had been prowling near the quarantine line when American destroyers started dropping signaling depth charges. Inside that sub, the ventilation system had died. Temperatures climbed past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide levels kept rising. The crew of 78 was gasping for air. They'd lost all contact with Moscow. Captain Valentin Savitsky, convinced that war had erupted above them, reached his breaking point. He ordered the nuclear torpedo fired at the American aircraft carrier. "We're going to blast them now," he screamed. "We will die, but we will sink them all." Launch required 3 senior officers to agree. The captain said yes. The political officer nodded. But the third man, a 34-year-old vice admiral named Vasily Arkhipov, refused. Arkhipov had already survived a nuclear near-disaster on submarine K-19 the year before, which may have given him the calm perspective to resist. He argued, reasoned, and held firm against 2 men who believed they were already fighting World War III. Because the rules demanded unanimous consent, that torpedo stayed in its tube. One man's calm refusal on a sweltering submarine might be the single most valuable individual contribution to human survival in modern history. Most people still don't know his name. While Arkhipov was saving the world underwater, the psychological game that would actually end the crisis was spinning up on the surface. This is where Cold War brinkmanship collided with something far more cunning. A set of secret psychological warfare tactics that the Kennedy administration would hide for the next 27 years. Here's the first move. October 26th brought a private letter from Khrushchev to Kennedy, rambling and emotional, offering to pull the missiles out in exchange for a simple American promise not to invade Cuba. Pretty reasonable deal. But the next morning, a second message arrived, this one broadcast publicly on Moscow radio with much tougher terms. The missiles would only leave Cuba if NATO yanked its Jupiter missiles out of Turkey. Kennedy's ExComm team hit a wall. Accept the second, harder offer publicly, and you look weak. Reject both, and you might trigger nuclear war. So Robert Kennedy, with crucial input from Soviet expert Llewellyn Tommy Thompson, crafted something brilliant, a technique later dubbed the Trollope Ploy, after an Anthony Trollope novel where a woman deliberately misreads a man's casual hand squeeze as a marriage proposal. The strategy was elegant. Respond only to the first letter, the softer offer, and simply pretend the second, harder message never happened. Accept what you wanted, ignore what you didn't. But here's the secret they buried for decades. The Trollope Ploy was just window dressing. That same evening, Robert Kennedy slipped into a secret meeting with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. In that room, RFK delivered both a threat and a gift. He told Dobrynin straight up, "This isn't an ultimatum, but a statement of fact. If you don't remove those bases, we will remove them." Then he offered the real bargain. The United States would quietly pull its Jupiter missiles from Turkey within 4 to 5 months. But this could never go public. "The president can't say anything about Turkey," RFK explained. "It would destroy Kennedy politically." Dobrynin agreed. Then something remarkable happened. When Dobrynin delivered a confidential letter confirming their arrangement, Robert Kennedy handed it back the very next day. He told the ambassador the United States would honor the promise, even without paper, but there'd be no written record. RFK admitted openly he didn't want a document floating around that could cause, in his words, irreparable harm to my political career. Only 9 American officials knew about this deal. Theodore Sorensen, Kennedy's speechwriter, later confessed he'd deliberately scrubbed all references to the Turkey missile swap from Robert Kennedy's Memoir of the Crisis. The truth stayed buried until a 1989 conference in Moscow, when Dobrynin and Sorensen finally spilled what really happened. This was the psychological masterstroke that stopped World War III. Dual-track diplomacy. Public hardline posturing to maintain credibility, coupled with a secret face-saving compromise that handed both leaders an escape route. Kennedy got to look tough. Khrushchev got the missiles out of Turkey. Neither had to publicly admit they'd backed down, and humanity survived. The crisis led directly to the famous Moscow-Washington hotline, ensuring future leaders would never again come so close to accidental war. Kennedy once observed, "It's insane that 2 men, sitting on opposite sides of the world, should be able to decide to bring an end to civilization." He was absolutely right. The uncomfortable reality is that survival came down to psychological cunning, secret illegal deals, and sheer dumb luck on a submarine. Secretary McNamara captured it perfectly years later when he learned about those tactical nukes in Cuba. This is horrifying. It meant that had a US invasion been carried out, there was a 99% probability that nuclear war would have been initiated. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains humanity's closest brush with extinction. The United States has never risen above DEFCON 3 since. And today, as tensions between nuclear powers heat up again, the lessons from those 13 days have never mattered more. Sometimes the most crucial negotiation isn't the one happening in front of cameras. It's the one unfolding in a dark room between 2 men with no written record, where both sides quietly agree to let the other save face. That's how you stop the end of the world.